which is very nice. And there we are. We are live. Welcome, Amantha King, a menopause coach and guru to businesses and women alike. We are living in a very different menopause landscape to what it was a few years back, aren't we? And in that, what do you think the biggest changes are, especially for employers?
Noise. I think the biggest changes for employers is the noise around menopause, and either be that from grassroots campaigners, celebrities, products being marketed. Lots of businesses tell me you can't move for the topic of menopause, but I think what has also changed is actually who's responsible. I think the reality is businesses are very much being levied as being responsible for menopause, because our NHS system doesn't have any capacity for it. So it's very much reliant on businesses to provide solutions that keep women in work.
Absolutely. And do you think they're rising to the challenge? Because of course, there are companies that are, barely, struggling to break even. And then of course, we've got the sort of multinationals at the other end. How's it starting to come together?
Well, it's a really good question. I would say in some sectors it is. I would say financial sectors, tech sectors definitely are. They are really, because what we must remember is, although we talk about menopause is actually part of diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion. So unless we actually have women at the top tables in business, we're not satisfying our diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion data and statistics. So, but menopause is important in every workplace and workspace. And I differentiate the two of those, because what menopause looks like in one workspace, for example, if you're in a factory, it can look very, very different if you're office-based or in fact home-based. So I just wrote an article yesterday, actually, and still staggeringly, 1 in 10 women between the ages of 45 to 55 have left work last year. This is Fawcett report data. And we know that 80%, from the same research, 80% of women say their employers have nothing in place.
Yeah, we have a very, very long way to go then. So when you go into companies, what do you tell them when it comes to why they should actually be taking this seriously?
Okay, so it comes down to the statistic. I mean, I always put up one amazing poster and it says 1 million women have already left work already. And I think for businesses, when they realise, okay, that's quite an alarming statistic. But most businesses go, well, I'm not sure that relates to us because we're fine, thank you very much. So the very first thing we talk about is their numbers, knowing their numbers. What does their employee landscape look like? How many people are there? What is the likelihood of menopause presenting as an issue in the organisation? And that's what becomes interesting. To keep people interested in the topic of menopause, my second slide shows the difference between men and women when it comes to their hormones, and the fact that men will have 3 full decades of having testosterone, and by the time they're 90, they'll still have 50%, whereas women have only 1 full decade in their 30s where they've got all their hormones. By the time she's 90, she's probably got about 3%. And this translates very nicely. So then once I've got everyone sitting on the edge of their seats with those statistics, it's like, okay, we really need to future-proof our businesses, because it's not a case of if women leave, it's when.
Yeah, that's very true. And in terms of economic arguments as well, do you hit them between the eyes with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, conservatively, if an employee leaves work today, that is a £30,000 loss to the business. £25,000 is lost in skill. And this is conservative. If you sort of extrapolate that up to some of the more senior positions, it's even more consequential to a business, and 5% to actually recruit. When you then also factor in, it takes about 135 days for someone to settle into a job. There's a massive loss of productivity. I also like to talk about the economy, because this is why the government have got involved. It's not a nice to do. There's no coincidence we have a women's health strategy. It's because actually the economists have worked out there's a massive gaping hole in the pension pots for future generations, because if 1 million women have already left, they're not contributing.
Yeah, yep. They're going to need money from somewhere.
Exactly. So where do we get that money? We can't tax the hell out of people. We have to get women back to work. So we actually have a dedicated minister looking at getting 50 somethings back into work. And what I can honestly tell you, Fiona, is since the pandemic, people are really going back to their values about what they want from a workplace experience. And so someone can be in a job within 72 hours. You can leave one job and be in the job of your dreams within 72 hours. So companies are really going to have to step it up if they want to retain their talent or attract new talent. And one of the first things I say when I coach women and businesses is, what are you offering women? What are you offering the partners of women navigating through the menopause? Because we mustn't forget the partners as well. And this is what starts to really turn this conversation from what probably could be seen as a women's health issue, roll of the eyes, to actually, how do we future-proof our business? How do we make sure we have the I don't want to say manpower, but actually how do we ensure we have the workforce to ensure that we are satisfying all the things that we should be doing, and particularly around diversity?
Absolutely. Question here from Sasha. What are the main reasons menopausal women are leaving the workplaces?
Fantastic question. I would say largely it isn't the physical symptoms, it's the psychological symptoms. Someone once disclosed to me quite recently, a really high-level executive of a global business. He said, 10 years ago, I was spinning plates like you wouldn't believe. Now all I hear is crashing plates. And that, for me, sort of says what women are dealing with. The stigma largely comes from people have fought very hard to get to the top of their careers. Because there is still a stigma and a taboo around this topic, people are unwilling or unlikely to disclose. So we have to bring this out of the shadows. We have to talk about it, and we have to talk about it in terms that some very simple adjustments are all that people need. And that's really how businesses can help alongside their EAP programs, occupational health. And that's why we
is an EAP program.
So an employee assistance program is usually a benefit in kind that a business will offer as part of its package to people, and that might involve private healthcare, access to various services, and that's what I guide businesses on. We take a health sense check of their employee assistance programs. If it's not supplying menopause on it, it's not really fit for purpose. So I go in and take a look at everything that they're doing, particularly in a wellbeing landscape, and we look to make it better.
Interesting you say that, because we see a lot of people, we see a lot of workplaces now going, yes, I've got a menopause policy. We see a lot of workplaces getting a menopause policy tick. What's the difference then between actually having a policy and making a policy that's actually useful for the employee?
Yeah, I love that question. So anyone who works with me knows I won't write a policy. I won't. If we write a policy, it's the cherry on top moment. What we do is we actually engage with employees first and foremost, because you can only create a positive menopause culture if we talk to the people who need it most. So I have a 3-step program. We go in and it's called Create, Develop, Build. And what we do is we create awareness for everybody, and that leaves no stone unturned through webinars, awareness campaigns. We get a steering group made up of employees throughout all levels in the organization, women and men, and those from the non-binary community and transgender community. Next stage, we train menopause champions, much like a mental health first aider. These people are responsible for signposting and supporting. We train managers, so managers know about menopause and how to have menopause related conversations to give reasonable adjustments. And then lastly, we will think about putting some guiding principles in place, a menopause policy, and we make it bespoke. We don't take things, and a standard policy. We make it fit for purpose. And so people feel they've had something that was created by them, for them.
You mentioned menopause champions there. So what happens though if I'm in a workplace and I don't get on well with my menopause champion? If my menopause champion is my manager and I don't feel comfortable talking to them about my symptoms, does it have to be somebody within the workplace, or can they find an external person who can actually fill this role?
Yeah. So that would almost be like a leading question, but it would be me, someone like myself, because you're absolutely right. People have to feel comfortable, and actually not everybody feels the need to use a menopause champion. Not everybody wants to talk about their menopausal status. So as part of my work, I provide resource lists, places where people can go, be signposted. So podcasts, books, websites. So that's part of the service that I offer. And I am actually a menopause coach myself. So the only thing I can't do, Fiona, is prescribe, but I can do everything else. So people book in with me for a 45-minute one-to-one chat. We talk about where they are, what they want, and I signpost directly. And that is hugely successful because people feel valued. And so we come at it from many, many different angles, really.
Yeah, because I could imagine there'd be certain things where you just think, I don't want this person to really know everything that's going on in my life. It's like, yeah, you sort of bring you a little bit too much into the workplace in some instances. Is there also, I mean, the other side that's actually really interesting in this is, I remember you were telling me before when we were chatting about this, the rise in the number of tribunal cases. So, I mean, obviously there's a much greater awareness now of what women should expect and expect in the workplace. Why are these happening, and how can people avoid them?
Again, I really love that question. So the reason employment tribunals are happening is because although menopause is not a protected characteristic, it's a very grey area. And what we've seen alone, the cases have doubled pretty much from 2021 to 2022, 23 cases alone last year, over 200 mentions of the term menopause in tribunals. And because it is a bit of a grey area, it's very difficult to know which way it will fall. It is mostly falling in the case of the person bringing the claim to say that they've been unfairly treated. One of the most high profile cases was actually BT. And Marchant, BT versus Marchant. Well, that was in 2014, I believe. Well, if you still Google BT, that's one of the first things that comes up. So it's really in companies' interest to make sure that everybody understands, pretty much like you would if someone was going off on maternity leave or someone was returning from long-term sick leave. Most people would know how to have a conversation around that because they're trained or taught, or it's put as part of their job responsibility. So what we're actually saying is the problem here is when we have people who don't understand what menopause is, don't seek to make a reasonable adjustment. And if you've had symptoms of menopause for more than 12 months, it is classed as a long-term experience for people, and therefore does have those positive sources of in terms of tribunals, we have a claim to make because we've not been supported adequately. And I'd just like to say it's more than a fan on a desk, by the way. There are more than 40 symptoms of perimenopause, menopause, and through our education sessions, we actually train managers to understand how to have those conversations. It's not about actually making suggestions. Often it's about the person who's involved saying what they need. And it can come down to things like, if you work in a factory and let's say, for example, you have flooding. Now, you might work in a designated area that has like GMP, good manufacturing practice. You can't just step off the line to go and deal with that. So we make very, very different cases for reasonable adjustments for someone in that setting compared to someone in a different setting. And so it's really about the adjustment appropriated to the individual and the workspace that they find themselves in. So again, we don't do a one size fits all. And it does irritate me hugely when people talk about fans on desks, because I never ever had a hot flash in 15 years of being perimenopausal. So we ask businesses to be very creative and again to seek consultation with the employees, because that's where the supports and solutions lie.
Yeah. So when you say reasonable adjustments, if I'm in a workplace and I've got any of those 40 symptoms, and I'm sure I had them all, what would be reasonable sorts of questions or reasonable things that you could suggest to your employer?
Yes, I mean,
their budget and stuff as well, really, haven't you? It's all very well to say, if I'm working in a small corner store and I've got people to see and there's only 3 of us in there, to say I need 20 minutes every hour to stand outside to do whatever, they're probably not going to take it. So what's reasonable?
Okay, so let's say sort of a mid-sized business. What would be reasonable is, first of all, by signposting that we are menopause positive and menopause aware, people can then come and say, for example, it can be something as simple as the colour of the chair you're sitting on. If you've got heavy menstrual bleeding, you really don't want to be sat on a white chair. So actually, a reasonable adjustment for you could be sat on a darker coloured chair. It might be, could it be easier for your desk to be nearer the bathroom facilities? Actually, if you're someone who really struggles certain days of the month, I mean, the gold standard would be for some people to be able to work from home on the days where you're really struggling. It could be about providing a locker for someone to store change of clothes, extra sanitary items. It could be about the availability of sanitary items, disposable towels, all of these sorts of things. Now, I've picked just one symptom there. If, for example, you're someone who's struggling with, your own temperature settings, and you're having hot flashes and cold flashes, again, we can ask for things like, can there be an appropriate adjustment around air conditioning, heating, that sort of thing. But what we don't want, a reasonable adjustment can also look like absence reporting. The simplest thing a business can do right now today is change your absence reporting. A lot of women are actually phoning in sick when actually they just need to maybe work from home or have a slight adjustment to their working hours, which means they're still productive and it's not making their sickness record look terrible, which is, by the way, why most women leave, because they feel dreadful and they feel like they're not achieving. So it's the psychological symptoms that affect women most. So it really is about those discussions, and there's such a lot of good guidance out there, but the best thing is a open conversation. People will tell you what they need quite quickly.
Yeah. I guess with the psychological ones, it was all very well to say, okay, I've got a physical problem and we can solve it by doing X, Y, and Z. But with the psychological ones, if you then sort of coming to your employer and thinking, Jesus, I'm just not coping, you're overwhelming me with all of this, I used to be able to do it, now I can't, there may really be a fear factor in that they're going to think, well, I feel unconfident and unable to do my job, and then they're going to have no confidence with me and they'll sack me. How do you get around that one?
Yeah, and that is a very, very real one. It is about, again, I keep coming back to it, it's about if everyone from the managing director, CEO down is attending these sessions, and often people will give their own personal experiences, there is such power in that. And that's what I really advocate. I advocate for people to share their stories, and it takes time. Let's be honest, it's going to take time. This is a cultural piece of work. This is not come in, tick, done. There's a longevity to it, and that's part of the role of the menopause champions, to keep the topic of menopause on the workplace agenda, buddying up with your mental health first aiders, talking about well-being. But coming back to that question about the psychological aspects, it's about managers noticing the behaviours rather than the symptoms of those behaviours. So let's imagine someone's a bit late with something, someone's forgetful. It's about having that really sensitive, compassionate conversation that says, is everything okay? I'm just, a little bit worried about you. I noticed that, you're leaving meetings, or, is there something going on? We can't say direct, is it menopause? But what we can say is, is there anything that you need? Is there something that we can do to support you? Sorry?
Unless, of course, you're Richard Branson, who apparently, there was an article the other day about that.
Horrified about that. I mean, that actually would be a case for an employment tribunal.
Do you think?
Well, yeah, it absolutely is. You
Yeah.
cannot levy at people that suggestion. There have been multiple cases where people have said, "Oh my God, what's wrong with you? Are you menopausal or something?" I mean,
yeah.
said in that.
I suppose it depends on the way you play it.
Exactly. But I think that's the bit that could be brought into question. So I think it's about creating an environment where someone actually comes forward and says, I am struggling. And statistically, we know that in the UK, women will work between 2 to 5 hours unpaid every single week because they are fearful about the performance of their work.
Yeah, and that's sad, because it's you don't want people going through that, really. And that loss of productivity is really, really difficult. In terms then of when the employer listens to these sorts of things, how can they extend that? I mean, what can they practically offer if I come in and I say, look, I'm just not coping with this anymore. I've got 15 things on my desk, and I used to go through these without any problem. I'd have them all to you in the next morning done perfectly. I can't do that now. How can they? I mean, it's a matter of resources and stuff as well. How do they actually help you?
Okay, so it can be as simple as things like job sharing. It can be about taking away some of those tasks. It can be asking you, what do you need instead? Coming back to that previous example. So, for example, if people have brain fog, if they're struggling with their memory, a lot of people find that actually having some electronic system of recording stuff can be really helpful. So when you're taking notes, I think there's an electronic notepad called I Am Remarkable. Things like this, we can make adjustments for people. Having things recording all Zoom meetings, so you don't have to sit there taking notes. It can be as the suggestions can be as long as a piece of string. It's just the limitation is your creativity. But what most people can do is they'll say, yeah, I'm struggling with this. Okay, as a manager, I'd be saying, okay, what can we do to support you? And they might say things like, could someone take notes in every meeting? Could we have that documented and put on a SharePoint? It starts to give people confidence that it's okay.
Yeah.
And
question here, have you seen workplaces that are currently getting it right for employees? Question over here.
Massively. And I take great delight. If you follow me on LinkedIn, I'm always crowing on about the businesses that are really trailblazing. And I've got small businesses, medium businesses, large businesses, some businesses with less than 50 employees. Every organization can do this. And do you know what? Having worked closely, I did some work with Santander. After they're one of the biggest banks that have done the most in terms of menopause. So I think they're 4 or 5 years into their journey. But one of the best bits of advice that Teresa Winters gave me is, there's so much free stuff available, and that's what I direct companies to. It's not about throwing lots of money at it, actually, and so much of this is free, available. It's just knowing where to look for it. So go take a look at my LinkedIn page. There's lots of endorsements there for companies that are getting it right. But actually, I would advise anybody who's watching this or listening to this, actually go ask your company what they're doing about it.
Yeah, and I guess that also takes courage, doesn't it, to be able to actually do that? Do you, how do you work up the courage to do that? Because you can imagine in a lot of workplaces, it may not be received all that well. Yeah. I mean, do you find that that employers are, in some ways actually quite frightened about this because they're thinking, oh my God, this is just another thing I have to deal with. We've got that sort of backlash of people who are saying, oh my, you're painting menopausal women as being unemployable because they've got all these issues. Are employers in some ways justified in thinking, can't deal with that?
I mean, I can see why they would. I can absolutely see why they would. However, we already know that the writing is on the wall. I mean, when we look at gender pay gap information, if a Labour government gets in, Labour have already said in February of this year that if they get in, they will expect every company with over 250 employees to publish data about how they're providing menopause provision through the gender pay gap portal by the government. So when I do speak to businesses, for example,
sorry, that is my dog.
That's lovely. That's lovely.
It is lovely, but it's a little bit loud. There's a workman outside who I can see way too much of his bottom of, and the dog's not happy. So yes.
The reality is that to attract talent, you'll need to be publishing that data anyway. So I would say this is not, it's not like some sort of Damocles hanging over people. This is genuinely the way that we keep businesses productive and profitable in the United Kingdom. We lose £1.8 billion to the economy because women are leaving work. So there is a business case for it. It's not a fluffy topic. It's not just a well-being topic. It really does have legs. And what I would say is it's just about asking, we want to retain the talent we've got. So I would say executives should be asking that question. If not now, when will we do it? Because the reality is you will be expected to.
Yeah, and it does require more than just downloading a policy and putting it on an intranet. Yes, and I hope that they understand that, because otherwise it would be a little bit meaningless, is a word that would spring to mind on that one. Women themselves, are there things that they can do themselves in the workplace that would help themselves, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things I take greatest pleasure in. I get to chair quite a few women in work networks, and I would say that is a fantastic place to start this, because it can feel very lonely. Usually we think it's just us. I'm the only one struggling, and there's power in connectivity, as we know. And I would say setting up a women in whatever, so whatever interest, it could be women in wellbeing, women in tech, women in financial services, women in banking groups. I worked with a very large bank last week, and it was wonderful. That's how they've started to bring menopause in. It was one of those networks that saw the work that I do. So I would say get a group of people, get some menopause lunch and learns going. There's so much stuff. There's so many rich podcasts and things available, and documentaries that you can screen for free. Have a chat about them. Book clubs, all of these sorts of things are a great way as a quite a nice gentle inroad to getting the topic being talked about. And once you have one or two people, it builds traction. I've seen these things grow very quickly.
And even if you're in the first couple of ones, that they're not willing to speak themselves, there are so many people who are willing to, you can get them on a Zoom and talk about it, so that you can just start the conversation. Get them in the office to come in and talk. I'll talk under wet cement if anybody wants me to come in and talk about menopause. And all the things that people don't mention, like the poor nasty menopausal vaginas and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Because yes, sometimes you may just need an external conversation starter.
Definitely. And sometimes those are the things that I will go in and do. I will go in and do a very broad brushstroke across what menopause is, and it always results in people going, can we have more of that, about sleep, nutrition, exercise. I think sometimes we're in danger of talking about menopause like it's this one singular object, and I tend to talk about menopause like it's an octopus with tentacles, lots of different arms going off of it, and then people realizing, oh, okay, so the fact that I'm feeling anxious and I don't really have many physical symptoms, I didn't realize. Taking along books to review so that actually it can be a shared experience. I often have a catalogue of books, and I say to people, this would be great. You could put stuff in your newsletters, put things on your dashboards at work, and it is really wonderful. You feel the energy shift in businesses when women get together and start talking about some of these real topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned things there like sleep. So these are just, the easy thing. Well, no, not easy. Sleep is one of the most difficult things to solve. But yes, self-care. I mean, these sorts of things, if you are having trouble getting sleep, then, find somebody or something that can help you. Anxiety, exercise, those sorts of things. So do you talk about those kinds of things as well?
Yeah. I do. And so, my background is I'm from the pharmaceutical industry. I worked in sales. So, I'm very objective focused. I want to get a job done for businesses. So this is pretty much like an 18-month process I work to. I'm pretty sure other companies doing similar to me will do it in less. But I feel if you're going to change culture, it takes time. But I will then do a lunch and learn sessions. So the sorts of things, just some little things to drop in here to this conversation. I love things like the R90 method. I advocate that, which is sleep is very erratic during perimenopause and menopause for one reason and another. But actually you can create stability in your sleep patterns by following things like the R90 method, which is our body, our wakefulness and our sleep takes place in 90-minute cycles. So actually the time you want to wake up in the morning, really you need to work back 90-minute cycles to decide what time you need to be going to sleep. More often than not, due to night sweats, cold flashes, needing to go for a wee, those things can interrupt our sleep cycle. But if you know how to manage it, purely with numbers, actually, number crunching and working out what time you should wake up and what time you should go to bed, that starts to put in place a nice ritual pattern of how you get your sleep. Because we know if we're not sleeping, our stress cortisol is up. And the minute we've got cortisol flooding our systems, that tricky little molecule takes 72 hours to come out of your system. So if we have people at work sleep deprived, multiple priorities, caring for elderly, caring for children still at home, and a pressurized job, we are on the back foot massively. So things like sleep, I'm, really and truly, HRT is one of the last things I talk about. I talk about all the fundamental pillars first. And again, we can get business to positively impact that by having campaigns for walking more at work, looking at what the catering facilities are providing. If it's very carb laden, that's not helping people going through menopause. So there's lots of power that we can put behind this knowledge and create that action. And it's not just about one or two people creating action, it's action en masse.
Yeah, they're very good points, actually. There's a question here as well from Sasha, again asking, would adjustments in the workplace involve occupational therapists?
Yes, they absolutely can do. And in fact, I think Carolyn Harris was in Parliament yesterday talking about the fact we've got 700,000 women on long-term sick. And actually, if we had occupational health better trained, and I make that point very, very clearly because not everyone else who's in occupational health is trained on menopause. So we have the same problem that we have throughout the whole NHS, which is we need to have people trained. I have had absolute horror stories about inappropriate advice given because people didn't know about menopause. So yes, with a fully trained up occupational health therapist who knows about menopause, again, it's pretty much like my role. You can work wonders. And I think that is a great place to go.
Yeah, that would really make a big difference, actually, in a lot of ways. And you're right, it comes back to the education because, as we know, we don't even have enough GPs who are well enough trained in menopause, let alone everybody else sort of, in the other areas of allied health professionals. It's we have a very long way to go. Yeah. A very long way to go, indeed. Are there other things? I'm just looking here at my little at my list of things. Are there other important things that we haven't covered, or do you think we've sort of ticked most of them off?
I think we've ticked most of them off. I mean, what I would say is if anyone is like a sole trader or with one or two employees, you can do stuff. I've gone to gift shops and done talks on menopause. And, the reality is we all need to be addressing this because it's just a case of when a woman goes through menopause. It's not a case of if. Every woman will go through this. And so therefore we need to just help people with that, because before we know it, people's anxiety really gets in the mix, and then people make decisions that maybe can be really detrimental. I mean, one of the things I also talk about is financial. How many companies do financial wellness and well-being in their organizations? Because menopause is affected, your finances will be affected. People who drop to half a day less work, or people who go part-time, are people aware that could affect their state pension?
Yep.
So just to say as a soundbite, people have until the 1st of July to make up any shortfall in their pension pot. You need 35 years of full employment history and contribution in order to get your full state pension. So if you've changed your hours at any way, shape or form, go on the government website, look for pension contribution deadline. I think it's the 1st of July that you've got to make up. So you could put a lump sum in and still be guaranteed to get your pension. But these are the sorts of things that we need to be advising women on as well. It's about actually, if you do really need to step away from work because you're not able to work because of your symptoms, how will that affect you financially? Because that could change your decision.
That really could, and that's something that you don't think about, do you? Because you just think, oh, when I turn 85 or however old is, whatever the pension age is, it'll probably be 110 by the time we get there. Well, I'm much closer than you, obviously. It'll probably be next year or so. But nevertheless, yes, that people will suddenly find that they had no idea that was going to happen.
Yeah, and we need
anyway, because I left Australia, nearly 20 years ago, lived in Russia for X number of years. I haven't had any superannuation or any pension for forever. So I know that I will never be retiring. But I would imagine for a lot of other people, that could be a really nasty scare when they suddenly think, well, I thought I was going to have this, but now I'm only going to have that.
Exactly. And that's why the economists are looking at this. So I'd really encourage everybody, if talk about this with your girlfriends. It really is as simple as going on the website, the .gov website link, and you can see I checked mine out. I'm okay because I've been working for more than 35 years, and it takes it from like when you've had your first Saturday job from when you're 16. So you might be surprised to see that you do actually have enough, but do check it out. And especially if you're making these these decisions, it might look like I'm just dropping to half a day, but that could affect your national insurance contribution. And the deadline is July of this year. Now, that should be on a national campaign. That should be on our television screens, and it isn't.
Yeah, because that's scary stuff, actually, isn't it? And why is it? Is this an annual? I know nothing about this, not being a UK resident until recently. I am now a resident. So just in case people don't know, is this a once only cut off, or is this an annual cut off that you've got?
No, you can go back 5 years under normal rules. You can go back 5 years and make up any shortfall. But so many of us have shortfalls or missed years. If you have taken time out to have raise a family, if you've been unemployed, you won't have contributed in that year, and it has to be 35 full years of contribution. So any gaps in your employment history could penalise you. And so at this time, with women working longer, it's because of, there's no surprises that divorce
really discriminatory. So
yes.
I mean, what about for people who are, on maternity leave and those sorts of things? Do they count? Because that'll put a huge hole in it as well.
Well, exactly.
This is condemning women to poverty in old age.
Exactly, Fiona, which is why we have to do everything possible to keep women in work or bring them back into the workplace. And so that's why there is
changed.
Yes, and get the policy changed. And that's, I mean, it is really poor that people are only finding out about this now, and it is discriminatory. It absolutely is. And we're on lower salaries compared to men anyway, so go figure type thing. So that is something that we probably need to do even more about. But I would say it's this: we've started, and for those naysayers who go menopause, it's the thin end of the wedge, because then we'll be talking about fertility, we'll be talking about men's health as well, we'll be talking about surgical menopause, cancers in women's health. This is the start, so we'll get to everyone else, but considering that this affects 51% of the population, it's probably the best place to start, really.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Yes, I don't think that people should feel excluded, because you're right. It's the thin end of the wedge, and all of these things will then go out to other people, because you can see there's quite a large. I mean, I remember years ago when I first started at one of the medical magazines in Australia, and andropause was just being spoken about, and everybody was going, "Oh, it doesn't exist." But now, you can see now that swell is coming back, and people going, "Well, hang on a second. Men do have the same sorts of issues. They do start to feel tired. They do start to put on weight around the middle. They do start to find that they're a little bit more emotional, that they can't cope as well as they did." So I think that people are really starting to think about that as well. It won't just be women. It will be, we're just at the beginning.
Exactly. And what I would say, we've got the European Menopause and Andropause Society presenting at the beginning of May. The number of posters that are talking about menopause in the workplace is phenomenal. And, I've got a colleague who's actually doing a poster on restricted workplaces. But so for pilots, how do menopausal pilots cope, in a restricted workspace like a cockpit? So I think we're going to need to rethink things if we are going to, because women are living longer, keep women in work. And you know what? Why not? I'm completely compos mentis. For a decade, I lost sight of who I was, but I'm probably more empowered now than I ever have been. And with the right supports at the right time, try stopping me. And I would want that for every woman. I would want every woman to know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Someone just needs to switch it on for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure there are quite a lot of people who say that I'm not compos mentis, but I would argue I'm staying here irrespective of that. Yes, mainly because I financially have to.
Yes.
But no, I couldn't imagine what I would do if I weren't doing something. I mean, I guess that's the nice thing about being a journalist, is you can continue on writing forever, even if nobody reads it. But you can sort of keep on going. But I can't imagine what I would be doing if I weren't doing anything at all. It would be hard. And if you've still got a valuable contribution, you might as well make it. And everybody has a contribution to something.
Exactly. And when we think about, on average, we will spend a third of our life post-menopausally. It's
maybe
about
50% of it.
Exactly, because if you've had an early menopause, then why wouldn't we have empowered women flourishing? They've got their seat at the table. Why should they have to give it up for somebody else? And certainly for a male role model to step in. This is about, actually, we keep people flourishing in work, being productive, their well-being is at an all-time high. And really, it just comes down to a few supports. And, you know, if we can help unburden the NHS by, you know, private healthcare schemes, which employers can provide, why not do that? Why not do that? It means more people will get access then, because we take a whole proportion out. They go privately through their business is paying for it. And so many people bump up the list through the NHS because it is struggling. And I think we've just got to find ways around it. So I'm really excited to hear what Helen Tomlinson, who is the new government appointed menopause employment champion, has got to say. I'm hoping to have a conversation with her, because she is going to direct businesses. She's going to create a template for businesses to follow, and it will be all about manager training and supporting women so they can stay in these wonderful roles that they've created for themselves.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, I will be interested to hear and see what she comes up with as well. And I hope that you have a moulding influence on this.
I hope so.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you, Amantha. If people want to find you, where do they find you?
Well, I'm everywhere and nowhere. But what I would say is connect with me on LinkedIn. You can follow me there. I put loads of stuff out. I'm at my Meno Coach on Instagram and at Amantha King Coaching. And I've got my own YouTube channel, Amantha King Coaching. So find me at any of those places and be in touch if you'd like more information.
Brilliant. And this will save to the Harley Street Emporium YouTube channel, and I will send you the link so you can post it in yours as well.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. So thank you very much, people here on Instagram who've been quite impatiently watching over there. This is why I keep on ducking over here so you can see the phone. Yep, ducking over there to do that. And I will speak to you again sometime in the near future, I hope.
Thank you so much. Lovely to see you, Fiona. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.